in today's lecture, what we will learn about the client server one way communication. So in that, what will be the use of client machine and the server machine is like, let's say we have a client, we have a server, and we want to send some data or a message to the server from client to server. So the mode of communication would be client to server only. Okay, in this scenario, the first scenario, the server would not be responding back to the client. Okay, that is the scenario. So we have discussed the steps, how the this communication will happen. First of all, the request for a connection will be generated from the client side. Then the some server would somehow be waiting for a connection request. Okay, we will discuss about this through code, and then server would accept that connection. Okay, and then the client responsibility is to prepare the data in a buffer. Okay, and then that data prepared by the client will be written on the buffer. Okay, if that data is written on the buffer, then the responsibility of the server would be to read the data from that buffer using, I'll tell you the sockets. Okay, and then they can close their connection and the functions they have opened. Okay, I'm not sure that I have discussed this thing with you or in the doubt class. So this is the main Java library in which we have two classes. The one is socket and second is the server socket class. So these two classes are mainly used for this client server communication. The socket class, this is a Java class, okay, which you can find inside this java.net package. Okay, uh, so this socket class is responsible to generate a connection at client side, and this server socket is responsible to receive a connection at server side. I'll explain through code. Okay, but you must understand we will have two what to say, the Java classes, Java codes. The first one would be client code, client side, and the second would be server side. So as I mentioned that socket class is used at client side. So what will happen, as you know, in Java, if you want to create any object of any class, if it is a class, then what will happen? We will use this new keyword and then we will use socket, but we would be passing some parameters into this as a parameter, input parameter. Okay, so what is the use of that? Let's say we have a client and I know the job of the client is to request for a connection. It means it is requesting for a connection to connect with the server. It means the client would know about the server IP address. Okay, so we are talking in terms of the socket programming, and we are not talking about end-to-end, the customer to customer understanding. It is happening inside the network. Okay, so that's why it is you may have this doubt that if we send a request, okay, then it will reach to DNS first and then the IP address would come into the picture. But I'm not talking about this as of now. I'm talking about right now the network. Okay, so when we talk about the network, it means this end-to-end, this customer relation with the network, we try to put aside, and we talk about the IP address now. Okay, so when, because we are talking in terms of network. Okay, if we talk in terms of customer, then we will talk about the DNS and the domain name. Okay, that would be our focus point. So if there is a client and client tries to communicate with the server, or they will definitely know the address of the server, or let's say the server would know, this client would know, sorry, the IP address of the server, and at which port. Let's say this is the server and we have many ports. like we have discussed over here. Okay, this is the server. We have different ports. So in this case, if we know the IP address, that is okay, but we also know the port number as well. So if client tries to communicate with the server, then these two things should be, should be there with this client. Okay, the client should know these two details. Then only the client can communicate with the server. This is about the client. Okay, this is all about the client. Okay, I think this is clear, and you guys can ask your doubt at the end of this lecture. Okay, and at the server side, I have mentioned that we have different class which is called server socket class. So in server socket class, okay, there shouldn't be any gap actually. And let's say this is called server socket S1 new. And okay, so at this end, what is the important thing for the server to know? Server, is not required to know which IP address the client or the IP address of the client, the server should know. Why? Because as you can see in this scenario, it is the need of a client to connect with the server. It is not the need of a server to get connected with the client. Okay, so in this case, the client would know the IP address of server. The server would not need to, there is no need of a server to know the IP address of the client. Okay, that is the important thing, so that we can understand the one-way communication. So in this scenario, the client would know the IP address of the server, but server is not required to know the IP address of the client. But definitely, if this port is closed or not active, then no client would be able to access this web application, let's say this facebook.com. So it is the responsibility of the server to make sure this port number is active so that the client can connect. Okay, if all the client would be having the IP address of server and the port number, then client can connect, but definitely only after when this port number is active, or the server is up for this port number. What it means? It means the server is making sure that this web application is up. Up means you can access this web application. So when you can access this application means the corresponding port number is active. So if you deactivate this port number, it means your app or the web application is down at this server. Okay, so you can manually up and down your web application. So only when your port number is active, then only you can access this facebook.com. So it is the responsibility of the server here to make sure this particular port number is okay. So let's say if this can be the question, if instead of 8080, if server is opening this 8081 port, it means one port at this server 8081 is active, rest are not active. Okay, and if the client is sending the request, okay, then the server would say, okay, this app is inactive, they not respond back to your request. So in that case, generally you find this server not found error, server not found. Okay, so according to the server, you are accessing something which is not allowed to. That's why that particular app is down, right? And that particular, if this particular app is up, it means, let's say this is google.com and this is facebook.com. So according to this server, this google.com you can access, but this facebook server is deactivated. So to activate the server, what is the job of the server? Is pass, when you create, is pass this port number on which the client can connect with you. So
सर आपकी आवाज कट रही है.
after you create this okay, let me check. Still it is breaking. Am I audible? Can anyone please confirm? Am I audible or is it
Yes, sir.
breaking?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so far I think you guys wouldn't be having any doubt. Okay, if you have doubt, you can ask. Do you have any doubt so far? Okay, so I'll consider it as no doubt. So we Java files, this is what we will create. Okay, if we want to create this one-way communication, okay, one-way communication, then these are the two files we will create. Okay, it will not be created by the, what to say, your machine. Okay, so first it is your job to create these two files to come to build this communication, this one-way communication. So when we address with the active port number, okay, and this is the server responsibility to make sure that that particular port number is active, or that particular app on this port number is active, or that particular app is up, so the client can access. Provide different number over here, it means the other kind of app on the server is up, so the client wouldn't be able to access that app. Okay, so in that case the connection request is stable. So the first, if we look at this scenario, the first the client would, because okay, so you might be thinking that if we have two Java program, then what we will run first of all, the client Java program or the server Java program? If we run both these programs simultaneously, then how they would communicate? Okay, so in your understanding, you can think the client.java and server.java. We will run both of these files. We will compile, okay, sequentially, and we will run both this file at a time only. Okay, then what will happen? This is the flow will be there, that the request for a connection would be, okay, they are actually creating a request by creating a new object, okay, having a valid IP address and a active port number, right? They should know in advance, the client would know in advance. And this wait for a connection request is mean the server is now making up this app so that the client can connect. So after that I'll explain how they will wait. There is a function called accept in server socket class, I'll explain you. So how these two functionality would be there, wait for a connection request and accept the connection. So in that scenario, they will wait for the connection request. This is the second scenario. But what is this accept the connection? How they would accept the connection? So that is the thing. So for that I'll show you some code, so on that you can understand. I'll explain one by one what is the role of accept function, and what is the sequence of connecting the client and server. So let me open the code for you. So as of now you need to focus on the server part. Okay, this is the server class and this is what we have discussed. Okay, and if this is what we have discussed, okay, this one thing only we have discussed now. Okay, this server ss1, it means this is the server socket object. Okay, and we have created this object, server socket object. Okay, now talk about this second function, which is the function of SS. This means it is the accept function which stabilizes the connection. Okay, so let's focus on this thing. The second point is to accept the connection or stable the connection. Okay, so how to make sure that your connection is stable? When you call this function of this object, okay, this is the object of server socket, and it will return, if it will return the detail of the socket. So you can see this is the socket class we have used at the client side. Okay, so let me share with you. There is the client side code. So this is the client side code where we have used a socket class. As you can see, this is the socket class and S1 is the object of that. And we are using IP address or the domain name of the server. Okay. In terms of network, we always talk about IP address and the active port number. So in that I have used localhost, or instead of that, I can use the direct IP address as well. So in my machine, I'm considering the local host. The server name is the local host. So it will automatically connect with the default server name. Instead of that, there is an IP address called 127. You can connect with 127.0.0. I think 1. Instead of localhost, even if you use this one, these are the IP address and the domain name fixed in your system to use as a default server name and the default IP address. This IP address is reserved for your default server over your machine. Okay, and this name as well as a domain name is used for this IP address as a domain name. Okay, so this is about the socket class. Okay, let's discuss this class in detail. So this is very important to understand that if we call this accept method through this object, then it is stabilizing the connection. But how? When this accept function would be able to return the detail of the socket. And which socket? The detail of the client socket. You understand what this accept function is doing? You don't need to go into that much detail, but I really like this thing to understand the bits and pieces of the code. Okay, so generally in the books it is written that if you call this method, then the connection is stable, but it is not the complete understanding of this function. Whenever you call this function, it is the responsibility of this function of this SS object. SS object is of server socket object at server class to return the detail of the client which has connected or which is connecting to this server. So this S1 is actually the detail of this particular client. You understand? Because this is the socket class we have used at the client.java side, right? And this is the server.java file. This one is the server.java file. I'll show you. This one is the server.java file. This is the client.java file. Okay, so far we are clear. So we have understood this, the use of this accept function and this socket class, because this function would return the detail of this particular socket. It means the IP address of the socket. So initially we don't discuss the IP address of the socket because it is not required, but definitely at the server side all the details are there, but explicitly IP address of the client are not used. Okay, because it is not necessary at the server side. For a client it is necessary, but for the server it is not necessary. Okay, so server it is saying that the connection is stable. Okay, let's reach to our okay, so in that we have sent the request for a connection. The server has waited for a connection, accepted the connection, and it is now the job of the client to prepare data to write on the buffer. Okay, so what it means this thing. Let's discuss these three lines in detail. So there is a data output stream in this Java input output library. Okay, so it will provide you the object of data output stream. So what is that? What it means to have a data output stream? It means in this communication, okay, if you can see, client is actually writing, okay, on this buffer. So we need a function of which can write on inside. We are using a function which can write over the buffer, okay, this thing. And when we would be writing at the server side, then we would use the read function to read from that buffer, okay. But the buffer is 1, okay. The buffer is same in which the client is writing and the server would be reading, okay. Functionality, it's this method, okay. This dout is the object, right? Object of which class? Data output stream, and you can find this inside this java.io file, okay, io library, okay. It means we need this write function. That's why we have created the object of this class, right? Because we wanted to use this write UTF function, okay. Let's discuss thing here in a data input stream at server side, okay. So at server side, we have used data input stream. Why? Because we have to use this read UTF. Read UTF means read the data in the UTF format. So if we want to use this read UTF function, because here we have to use this read function at server side from the buffer, it means we need to use this read UTF. And for calling this function, we need to create the object of data input stream. So we have two classes in this IO library. The one is data output stream and the second is data input stream. So output stream is to write something over the buffer, and input stream is to read something out of the buffer. This is the concept, okay. So it means client would access would call a function which would write over the buffer, and the server would call a function which would read from the buffer. I think this is clear, okay. It means this data output stream class is used to create the object which would call the write operation, and this data input stream is created. The object of this data input stream is created because this object is used to read the data, okay. I think this uh, so far, like, we would be clear, okay. There would be nothing, uh, no doubt should be there. If you have doubt, you can ask, but so far the doubt shouldn't be there, because it is just we are using the output class to call the output method. We are using this input class to call this input method, okay. So this is clear, but as you can see, there is one buffer, okay. If client has written, okay, please pay the attention on this fact, that if client has written something over this buffer, then the client would definitely know the detail of this buffer, right? Again, if client has written something on this buffer, it means server can read through that function, but the data return over the buffer is written by the client. It means if we have the socket detail, we can access this buffer, right? So as you can see, this is through this S object. S is the socket object. So we are using this get output stream. Get output stream job is to get this buffer, okay. Get output stream is the job of this. Is actually a socket function. It is not a data output stream function. As you can see, this is the object of socket class. So it is the responsibility of the socket you are creating. So sockets and server sockets are usually used to access the buffer, okay. This buffer is related to the socket and server socket class, and these write and read operations are related to the input output library function, the data input stream or the data output stream. They are not related to the socket. But in the socket programming, this socket class is responsible to access this buffer, and this server socket is responsible to access this buffer, so that the function can read the data from that buffer. Okay, this is very simple thing. Okay. Okay, so it means we are using the socket to access this buffer, and to access the buffer is the get output stream on which we can write. See, we want to write something on the buffer, so we are accessing socket. We are accessing the socket to use the buffer, and we will get the output buffer. You please focus on this thing, that we are accessing get output stream. But when it will reach to the server, it would become the get input stream, because input stream is required to read. Okay, you would understand through this. Let's say this is the socket, and you are calling the function of the socket is get output stream. So it is the parameter for this data output stream, so that the function of write UTF of this data output stream you can call, and you can pass the data. Okay, through this socket, because S is the object of socket, you are accessing the buffer, and then you are writing. Okay, this is clear. In terms of server, when we talk about the server is not writing anything on the buffer. It means, first of all, the detail of writing on the buffer would be at client side. So what we will use the server socket class to access the socket detail, and the socket would know the buffer, right? So we have used this accept function to return the detail of the socket, this S, and this S is used to access the input stream. So this is the responsibility of the socket. The socket would know the detail of the buffer when you write and when you read from the buffer. So socket would know which function to call of the socket class. So if you are writing over the buffer, okay, then those detail will be written by the socket, but the function is this get output stream. But when you try to read something out of the buffer, then the socket from the client side is responsible for providing the detail or the path where this read function can run. Okay, so this is the scene that this socket input stream is used. Okay, and it is reading as a string. This is the object of data input stream, and we are using this read UTF. Later on, we are flushing and closing the connection. We are flushing the object what we have written in the buffer. Okay, and again in the server side, we are simply printing this what we have received from the client. So what I will discuss your doubt as well if you would be having. So but before that, let me run these programs. Okay, so you would know how these client and server are communicating with each other. But as you can clearly see, this message is sent by the client, hello server, and the server would receive this as a string. Okay, and it will print after message from the client string. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll run these program, and then we will discuss your doubt. Okay. Okay, so this is the directory where I have written these programs, the client and server programs. Okay, so what I'll do, I have opened two terminal. That is what you have to do as well. The one in which, in the first one, we will compile this client Java program, Java C and client. So we have compiled, so it is successful. In the second window, what we will do, we will compile the server program. So it is also compiled. So what I'll do, let's understand this thing, that first of all, the client would request, okay, to connect with the server. But what will happen if we run the server program? So if we run the server program, it means it will wait for a connection request. So if you run the client program first of all, okay, then it will be waiting for the server to up the application, right? Because if we have not run this server Java program, then the client would be searching over the net that where is this server. So the client would keep searching. Let's say if we run the server program first and then the client program, then in that case, if we run the server program first, it means the server would wait for a connection request, and then it will keep waiting for the connection request till we run this client.java program. Okay, so if we will run the client Java program, and then the connection accept would be there. Okay, so I'll first of all, in a simple terms, let me run this client program first of all. If I simply run this client program, there is a spelling mistake. Java. Sorry. So connection is refused. Okay. So let me. Java. Okay. So connection is refused. So let me run this server program. Java. Dot we don't need. It is waiting for the connection. So if we have run this server, okay, it means according to our nodes, okay, according to our nodes, the server would wait for a connection request, okay, and then we will run this client Java program, okay. So, and now I'll compile again if there is a issue. Okay, I'll compile and I'm running. So now it is successful, and at the server side the message would be there. So this message is here, as you can see. So let me increase the size so you would be able to. Message from the client is hello server, and this time, so the flow we have understood that if we run the client, then there is a connection refuse request because server is not up. Okay, and if we run the server first of all, then it will keep waiting for the connection request, and then I run the client program and everything went successful, right? So this is the complete flow of a client server one-way communication. Okay, so this is how the server socket and the socket class are usually communicating. But the important role of the communication, one-way communication of socket and server socket class is the use of these classes. Okay, and this function, because these are very important. Even if you go for the networking server socket programming jobs, they will definitely ask you this question: this what is the role of this accept class? Okay, and you would simply say it is stabilizes the connection. It would not be enough because it is returning the socket detail. It is the object, right? And it means this function is returning the socket details which would be later on used to access the buffer. From that buffer, this would permit that you can read, not write, but this would give you the permission to write on the buffer. Okay, this is actually giving you the permission what you need to do with the buffer. You are using the socket. S is the object of socket here, and again S is also the object of the socket, which is returned by the accept method of server socket class, right? So it means this S dot get output stream and S dot get input stream is to get the permission what you want to do with the buffer. But to writing and reading on the buffer, we use different library, input output library, which is the first class is data output stream, which is used to write on the buffer, and data input stream is to call this read UTF method. With this class, you cannot write. With this class, you are supposed to write. with this class you are supposed to read from the buffer, and this is the permission you are giving to the this data input stream and data output stream. What do you want to do with the buffer? And then you are flushing the object, then you are closing the connection here, and you have written this code in try catch block, because if you find any exception, the exception will be thrown. In that case, when I have you know run this Java client program, it has forwarded me this error, this connection refused. So it is saying the connection exception is here. So it means in our code, okay, in our code, it means if you run this program and the server is not up, it will throw an exception which is shown to you over the terminal. Okay, if everything is okay, it means the server is up, then nothing would happen. And if server is up, server will wait, accept, and then print that data. It is just a one-way communication. We are sending data from client to server, not server to client. We will see in the further class, but in today's class we have seen only the one-way communication. Okay, so